I don't know about you, but I tend to mark the sort of epochs in my life by thinking about the albums or the CDs or the musical tracks I've been listening to. I'm pretty predictable, so in the 1960s I'm listening to Highway 61, 1970s I'm listening to Blood on the Tracks, 1980s I'm listening to Oh Mercy. Can you pick up a trend here? You get the idea, you get to pick your own soundtrack. But in the same way, I also mark each era in my life by thinking about the books that I'm reading. And I can think of no other author who has captured the essence of our times, both through his regular columns and through his incredibly engaging books, than Tom Friedman. The Lexus and the Olive Tree, The World is Flat, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, and his most recent book, which I just cannot recommend highly enough, Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. Tom, thank you for your incisiveness. Thank you for your optimism. And welcome to the 2017 Resnick Aspen Action Forum.
Thank you so much, Peter. Walter, thank you for having me. Stuart and Linda, thank you for inspiring this. Just seeing those young people, how can you not be an optimist? I'm going to talk for the next 45 or 50 minutes, actually, about my new book, which I think will maybe give a frame for the world in which those kids are going to grow up, and then we'll have a little time for questions. If you could put your cell phones, though, on silent or stun or whatever, I would be forever grateful. So the first question I always get when I tell people about my book, Thank You for Being Late, is where from comes the title? And the title actually comes from meeting people for breakfast in Washington, D.C., where I live. And I don't like to waste breakfast by eating alone, so I like to learn from someone when I'm downtown near the office. I eat breakfast with my wife all the time. That's always invigorating. And every once in a while downtown, someone comes 10, 15 minutes late. And they'd say, Tom, I'm really sorry. It was the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And one day, 2 years ago, one of them, Peter Corcell, an energy entrepreneur, actually 3 years ago, came to breakfast 15 minutes late and did the usual, Tom, I'm really sorry, the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And I just spontaneously said to him, actually, Peter, thank you for being late. Because you were late, I've been eavesdropping on their conversation. Fascinating. I've been people watching the lobby. Fantastic. And best of all, I just connected two ideas I've been struggling with for a month. So thank you for being late. Well, people started to get into it. They'd say, well, you're welcome. Because they understood I was actually giving them permission to pause, to slow down, to reflect. In fact, my favorite quote from the front of the book is from my teacher and friend, Dov Seidman, who says, when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. But when you press the pause button on a human, it starts. That's when it starts to reflect, rethink, and reimagine. And boy, don't we need to do a lot of that right now. Now, this book was actually triggered when I paused and engaged with someone I would not normally engage with. I live in Bethesda, and I actually take the subway to work around once a week. And for me, that involves driving from our home on Bradley Boulevard to the Bethesda Hyatt. I park in the public parking garage beneath the Bethesda Hyatt, and I take the red line into D.C., where the New York Times bureau is a couple blocks from the White House. I did that, again, over 3 years ago now. Went into the Times, took the red line back, got my car, timestamp ticket, drove to the cashier's booth, handed it to the cashier. He looked at it and looked at me and said, I know who you are. I said, great. He said, I read your column. I said, great. Parking guy reads my column. He said, I don't always agree. I thought, get me out of here. But I actually said, well, that's good. It means you always have to check. And I drove off thinking, that's great. The parking guy reads my column. Anyways, a week later, I took my weekly trip into D.C., parked my car, red line, D.C., New York Times office, day, red line back, car, timestamp ticket, cashier's booth, same guy's there. This time he says, Mr. Friedman, I have my own blog. Would you read my blog? I thought, oh my God, the parking guy is now my competitor? What just happened? So I said, well, look, write it down for me and I'll look it up. So he tore off a piece of receipt paper and wrote on it, odenambi.com. I went home, I called it up on my computer. Turns out he's Ethiopian, writes about Ethiopian politics, a real democracy advocate from the perspective of the Oromo people. I thought about him for a couple days, shared it with Anne, and I eventually decided this was a sign from God that I should pause and engage this guy. But I didn't have his email, so the only way I could do it was park in the parking garage every day, which I did for 4 days, and we eventually overlapped at 7 in the morning. I stopped my car into the gate so it couldn't come down. I got out. I said, Ayile, now I know his name, Ayile Bojia, would you give me your email? I want to send you a message, which he gladly did. And that night I began an email exchange with him, which is what ultimately triggered the book. And I saved all the email there in the front of the book. Some of them are quite funny. In which I basically said to him, I have a proposition for you. I will teach you how to write a column for the New York Times if you will tell me your life story. And he basically said, I see you're proposing a deal. I like this deal. Okay. So we agreed to meet near his office at Pete's Coffee House in Bethesda. Pete's like that and gave me a year's worth of free coffee. And I came with a 6-page memo on how to write a column, and he came with his life story. Ethiopian immigrant, was a graduate in economics from Haile Selassie University, was a blogger and political activist, democracy activist in Ethiopia, got thrown out of the country for his efforts, came to America as an immigrant, a political exile. We welcomed him. He was blogging on Ethiopian websites, but he found they were too slow. They wouldn't turn his stuff around fast enough. So he started his own blog, and now, Mr. Friedman, I feel empowered. His Google metrics say he's read in 30 different countries. This is my parking attendant. And it's a wonderful story of how anyone today can participate in the global conversation. And we became and have remained friends. Well, I then handed him my 6-page memo on how to write a column for the New York Times. I'd thought about some of this before, but had never put it together until he really asked me. I explained to you that a news story is meant to inform. I could write a news story about this event, and you all would tell me whether I informed better or worse. But a column, an opinion article, is meant to provoke. It's meant to produce a reaction. So I'm either in the heating business or the lighting business. That's what I do. I'm either doing a heating or a lighting. I'm either stoking an emotion in you or I'm illuminating something for you. And if I really do my job well, I do both. I produce both the reaction of heat and light. And you know as a columnist whether you've produced a reaction by the reaction you get. Readers will say, I didn't know that. That's a good reaction. Readers will say, I never looked at it that way. That's a good reaction. Readers will say, I never connected those things. That's a good reaction. Your favorite, You Live for This, happens 4 times a year. Readers will say, Mr. Friedman, you said exactly what I felt, but didn't know how to say, God bless you. Readers will say, I want to kill you dead, you and all your offspring. That will also tell you you've created heat or light. But I explained to Ayila that to produce heat and light requires a chemical reaction, and you had to combine 3 chemicals. First is, what is your value set? What are the principles, values, and issues you are trying to push into the world? Are you a communist, a capitalist, a neocon, a neoliberal, a libertarian, a Keynesian, a Marxist? What is the value set you're pushing? Second, how do you think the machine works? So the machine is my shorthand for what are the biggest forces shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days. As a columnist, I'm always carrying around in my head a working theory of how the biggest gears and pulleys of the world work, because I'm trying to take my values and push the machine in their direction. And if I don't know how the machine works, I'll either not push it or I'll push it in the wrong direction. And lastly, what have you learned about people and culture? Because there's no column without people, and there are no people without culture. How does the machine affect different people and culture, and how do different people and culture come back and affect the machine? Now, those of you who read my column know, in terms of my own values, I'm not exactly a liberal. I'm certainly not a conservative. That's because my values actually do not emerge from a philosopher. They actually emerge from the small town in Minnesota where I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s at a time and place where politics worked, which had a big impact on me. How do I think the machine works, and what have I learned about people and culture? Well, that was the book I decided to write. The first half is about the machine, and the second half is about how this machine is not just changing your world today, it is reshaping your world. And it's reshaping 5 realms in particular: politics, geopolitics, ethics, the workplace, and community. So let me share with you how I think the machine works today, the biggest gears and pulleys. I think what is shaping more things in more ways, in more places on more days today, is that we are in the middle of 3 nonlinear accelerations, all at the same time, with the 3 largest forces on the planet, which I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. So the market for me is digital globalization. All those young people talking about how they're using Instagram now. Globalization today, this is not your grandfather's globalization. That was containers on ships and planes. What is driving globalization today is the way we are digitizing everything and globalizing it through Instagram, through Facebook, through PayPal, through MOOCs, all of these. If you put digital globalization on a graph, it looks like a hockey stick. Mother Nature for me is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population growth in the developing world. If you put that on a graph, it looks like a hockey stick. And put the first slide up if you would. Moore's Law, coined by Gordon Moore in 1965, the co-founder of Intel, argued that the speed and power of microchips would double roughly every 24 months. It's now closer to 30 months, but never mind, that Moore's Law exponential has held up for 52 years. And every year, for the last 52 years, someone has written an article saying Moore's Law is over or about to end. And what they all have in common is they were all wrong. Now, my argument is that these 3 exponentials in the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law, and they're all feeding each other. More Moore's Law drives more globalization drives more climate change. They are not just changing our world. They are fundamentally reshaping it. So I'm not going to talk about the climate part. You've heard enough about that. I'm not going to talk about the market, the digital part. I'm going to focus on the Uber driver, Moore's Law. Now, one of the hardest things for the human mind to grasp is the power of an exponential, because we rarely encounter something that doubles and doubles and doubles and doubles and doubles, and what impact that can have. So your computers now, those of you who have your laptops, is probably running on an Intel 14 nanometer chip. I can barely see it. That chip has on it 37.5 million transistors. At the end of 2017, under Moore's Law, Intel will begin shipping its 10 nanometer chip. That chip has 100 million transistors per square millimeter. Now that's a very abstract thing for most people, so let me reduce it to something concrete. The difference between a 14 nanometer chip and a 10 nanometer chip is a car that needs the entire trunk to be a self-driving vehicle, and the brains of the self-driving vehicle take the entire trunk, to a car that will just need a little box under the front seat. So if you think the world is fast now, just wait till the end of 2017. Intel wants to try to explain the power of Moore's Law, took a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle and said, what if this Volkswagen Beetle had improved at the same rate of microchips? And their engineers calculated that if that were the case, that Volkswagen Beetle today would go 300,000 miles an hour, it would get 2 million miles per gallon, and it would cost 4 cents. You would be able to drive it your entire life on 1 tank of gas. That is the power of the technological exponential that is feeding all of this. Now, my chapter, though, on Moore's Law is called What the Hell Happened in 2007? What the hell happened in 2007? 2007 I know what you're thinking. What's this guy talking about? Utterly innocuous year. Well, here's what happened in 2007. The year was kicked off at the Moscone Center in San Francisco in January, when, as Walter can tell us, one Steve Jobs unveiled the first iPhone in January of that year. But that was just 2007 clearing its throat. Yes, Steve Jobs introduced a phone that had more compute power in it than the Apollo space mission and doubles as a phone and a camera. And we're about halfway to putting one of them in the hands of every person on the planet. That's how the year started. In 2007, a company called Facebook, which had been confined to high schools and universities, in late 2006 opened its platform to anyone with a registered email address, i.e. kids, your mom and dad. And in 2007, it went global. In 2007, a company called Twitter split off on its own independent platform and went global. In 2007, the most important software you've never heard of, called Hadoop, named after the founder's son's toy elephant, launched its algorithm into the wild. Hadoop is what enables 1 million computers to work together as one. I think that's called big data. The algorithms weren't really invented by Hadoop. They were invented by Google, GFS, and MapReduce for the techies out there. But as Doug Cutting, the founder of Hadoop, explains, Google lives in the future and sends us letters back home. And what Google did was leave a trail of breadcrumbs from its AI and big data algorithms for the open source community. Doug Cutting led the project to reverse engineer them, and Hadoop was the free open source public version of it. There isn't a major company today not running it. In 2007, the second most important software you've probably never heard of, called Vmware, went public. Vmware created a Rosetta Stone that enabled any operating system to work on any computer. For anyone over 60 today, will remember how remarkable that was, and that created the foundation for big data. In 2007, the third most important software you've never heard of, called Github. Today, the world's largest repository of open source software with 14 million users and counting. I had to change the number 3 times in writing the book, went public and opened its doors. In 2007, a company called Google bought a little-known TV company called YouTube. And in 2007, the same company called Google launched its own operating system into the wild called Android. In 2007, IBM launched the world's first cognitive computer called Watson. And in 2007, a guy up in Seattle named Jeff Bezos launched the world's first e-book reader called the Kindle. In 2007, the internet crossed 1 billion users, actually late 2006, and it seems to have been a tipping point, scaling in 2007. Here's what else happened in 2007. If we get the next slide up. Yeah, that's a graph of the cost of sequencing a human genome. You'll notice it was $100 million in 2001. It fell to $10 million in 2006. And then it goes over a cliff like an EKG heading for a heart attack in 2007, down to $10,000. All that happened in basically 1 year. In 2007, solar energy took off, as did a process for extracting natural gas from tight shale called fracking. Between 2006 and 2008, America's total natural gas reserves increased 35%. That is a staggering number. In 2007, a mysterious financial wizard and internet financier in Japan, we think, launched a new internet currency called Bitcoin. This is a graph of social networks. The white line going down, that's the cost of generating a megabit of data. You'll notice that it goes straight down like an EKG, again, heading for a heart attack in 2007. The blue line is the speed of transmitting that data, and you'll notice the 2 lines cross in 2008, close enough for government work. This is a graph of cloud computing. You will notice the cloud was born in 2007. In 2005, a sorry, 2007, Intel also for the first time went off silicon to extend Moore's law. It introduced non-silicon materials into its transistors. In 2005, Michael Dell, the founder of Dell Computers, retired. And in 2007, he decided he better come back to work. Turns out, friends, 2007 may be understood in time as one of the single greatest technological inflection points we've ever experienced. And we all completely missed it because of 2008. Yeah, right when we went through one of the greatest technological inflection points, like we're on a moving sidewalk at an airport that suddenly went from 5 to 50 miles an hour almost overnight. Right when that happened, and our physical technologies accelerated, and our social technologies, the regulation, the education, the managerial reform you would want to go with that, it all froze because we entered the biggest recession since 1929. And in that dislocation between our physical technologies and our social technologies, a lot of Trump and Brexit voters were born. What happened in 2007? Well, what I trace in the book is your computer actually has 5 key components. It's got that Moore's Law processor, it's got a storage chip, it's got networking, it's got software, it's got a sensor, it's got a camera. Well, what I show actually is through the stories of innovators in all 5 of those areas, all 5 were actually in a Moore's Law. And in 2007, they all melded together in this thing we call the cloud. The cloud. But I never use the word the cloud in my book because it sounds so soft, so fluffy, so cuddly, so benign. It sounds like a Joni Mitchell song. I've looked at clouds from both sides. This ain't no cloud, folks. This is what I call in the book a supernova. The supernova, for all you science fans, is the largest force in nature. It's the largest release of energy in nature. It's the explosion of a star. Because I think what happened in 2007 was a release of energy into the hands of men, women, and machines that overnight changed 4 kinds of power. Changed the power of one. What one person can do today as a maker or a breaker is unlike anything we've seen before. Those kids you just saw, the making they're doing is phenomenal. But it was born in 2007, those tools. We now have a president who can sit in his pajamas in the West Wing and tweet to hundreds of millions of people, possibly 1 billion around the planet, without an editor, a libel lawyer, or a filter. Or a brain. What's really scary is the head of ISIS can do the exact same thing from Raqqa province in Syria. Makers and breakers have become super empowered. It changed the power of machines. Machines are now acquiring all 5 senses. We have never lived in a world where machines had all 5 senses. We sort of crossed that line February 14th, 2011, on, of all places, a game show. There were 3 contestants. 2 were the all-time Jeopardy champions. The 3rd contestant simply went by his last name, Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson passed on the first question, but he buzzed in before the 2 humans on the second question. See if you can beat him. The question was, it's worn on the foot of a horse and used by a dealer in a casino. And in under 2.5 seconds, Mr. Watson said, in perfect Jeopardy style, what is a shoe? And for the first time live on TV, we saw a cognitive computer figure out a pun faster than the 2 all-time Jeopardy champions. And the world kind of hasn't been the same since. It changed the power of flows. You also saw that with those kids. See, ideas now flow and congeal and melt and break at a speed we've never seen before. 6 years ago, Barack Obama said marriage is between a man and a woman. Today, Barack Obama says, blessedly so, in my view, marriage is between any 2 people who love each other, and he followed Ireland in that opinion. Ideas can come out of nowhere now and spread and congeal faster than ever. And that's why stocks today don't matter at all. It's the flows and being in the flow that matters. And lastly, it's changed the power of many. Because men and women amplified by these tools, we are now becoming the biggest forcing function in and on nature, which is why the new geophysical era is being named for us, the Anthropocene. So my argument is those 4 changes in power, they're not just changing your world, they're reshaping your world. And they're reshaping 5 realms: politics, geopolitics, ethics, community, and the workplace. So let me talk about a couple of them. Let's talk about how the workplace is being reshaped. We're all living in the middle of that. Put up the next slide, if you would, please. So next one. So when I was out working on the book, I went to Google X and met with Astro Teller, chief astronaut at Google X. Astro's an amazing guy. And I was going over my thesis with him, and he went over to his whiteboard, and he drew this sort of crude little graph. The blue line across the middle, you'll notice it has a slightly positive slope, but it's very gradual. I said, what's that, Astro? He said, that's the average rate at which human beings and societies adapt to change over time. It has a positive slope, but it's gradual. Then he drew that white line. I said, what's that, Astro? He said, that's technology. So at the left end of that line, if you lived in the 11th or 12th century, at the left end of that line, we forget you could go a whole century without your bow and arrow getting better. There was no bow and arrow 2.0 between the 11th and 12th centuries. But then we got Copernicus and Galileo and Da Vinci, as Walter will tell you, and the scientific revolution, and then Jobs and Microsoft and Gates, and the line starts to go due north. And then Astro drew that little diamond there. I said, what's that, Astro? He said, that's where we are. We're at a place now where technology is simply evolving under Moore's law faster than the average human being in society can adapt. Then he went over and got another magic marker, and he drew a little dotted line. I said, what's that, Astro? He said, that's learning faster and governing smarter. And that is the job of governance and education today. How do we lift the slope of the adaptation line to meet technology where it is and where it's going? So my chapter on the workplace is called How We Turn AI into IA. How do we take artificial intelligence and turn it into intelligent assistance, ANCE, intelligent assistance, ANTS, and intelligent algorithms so more people can learn faster and govern smarter? So I'll give you a quick example of each one. My section on intelligent assistance is based on the Human Resources Department at AT&T. I spent a lot of time there. AT&T, 340,000 employees, a company in the most competitive business in the world, telecom, living right next to the supernova, competing every day with Verizon and Deutsche Telekom and Sprint and Verizon and all the others. Good chance that whatever is going on in the Human Resources Department at AT&T is coming to a neighborhood near you. So what's going on there? So the way their HR department works is that their CEO, Randall Stevenson, begins the year now with a radically transparent speech about where the company is going, what businesses they're going to be in, and what skills you need to be an employee at AT&T that year. Then they put every one of their managers, 110,000 people, on their own in-house LinkedIn system. So I'm an AT&T employee, and I'm there, and they ranked the 10 skills you need. I'm making up the number, I don't remember exactly how many, to be a thriving AT&T employee that year, and it turns out I have 7 of the 10, but I'm missing 3. Then they partnered with Sebastian Thrun from Udacity, and he created nano degrees for all 10. Then they came to me and said, Tom, here's the deal. We will give you up to $8,000 a year to take the nano degree courses for the skill sets you're missing. In fact, we heard that you're interested in the Middle East. We'll pay for a course on archaeology as well. In fact, we just created a course with Georgia Tech, $6,000 master's degree online, 1 year. We're in for that as well. Just one condition, Tom. You have to take all these courses at night and on weekends on your own time. If I say to AT&T, you know, I've actually climbed up one too many telephone poles, I'm kind of out of here. That's not how I want to spend my weekends. AT&T now has a wonderful severance package for me. Okay, but I won't be working there much longer. Their social contract with their employees is very simple. If I take those courses and build my skill sets according to the direction they think the company is going, Their bargain is they'll offer me the new jobs first, not to go outside. Their social contract with their employees is very simple. You can be a lifelong employee at AT&T, but only if you're a lifelong learner. If you are not ready to be a lifelong learner, you can no longer be a lifelong employee at AT&T, and that is the social contract coming to a neighborhood near you. As my teacher and friend Heather McGowan points out, the days when you could get a 4-year degree or 6-year degree and think you could dine out on it for 30, 35 years, that knowledge, that is so gone in the age of acceleration, which is why Heather says never ask a kid today what you want to be when you grow up. Because unless it's policeman or fireman, it ain't going to be there, okay? Only ask your kid today how you want to be when you grow up. Do you want to have an agile learning mindset? Will you be inspired to be a lifelong learner? It's not what, it's about how, which is why another one of my teachers in the book, Marina Gorbis from the Institute of the Future, says the biggest divide in the world we're going into is not going to be the digital divide. That was so 1990s, okay? The days when upstate New York had no internet and New York City did, or America had it and sub-Saharan Africa didn't. If the digital divide isn't gone, believe me, it's going to be gone in 5 years. And in that world, the most important divide, says Marina, is going to be the motivational divide. Who has the self-motivation to be a lifelong learner long after you've left home and mom and dad are not there to say, Tommy, have you done your homework? And this is a world where the motivational divide will be more important than ever. And I believe that is one of the things roiling our society today, because a lot of people are not built to be lifelong learners. That's what's going on in the workplace of intelligence assistants. What about intelligent assistant? My example for that is Qualcomm, another company I spent a lot of time with in San Diego, 64-building campus. Many of you may never have heard of Qualcomm. That's because they made the inside of your iPhone. The software and the hardware was not most of it made by Apple. It was made by Qualcomm, which is why Apple is always suing Qualcomm over patents. So 3 years ago, they went in their 64-building campus. They took 6 buildings and they put sensors everywhere. Every door, window, HVAC system, heating system, pipe, computer, light. They put sensors on everything. Then they beamed all that data up to the cloud, up to the supernova, and then they beam it down now onto an iPad with an incredibly user-friendly interface for their janitors. So if I leave my light on when I shouldn't, or my computer bursts, or a pipe goes off over my head, the janitors there know it before I do. They just swipe down to see who to call to fix it or how to fix it themselves. Qualcomm has turned their janitors into maintenance technologists. Their janitors now give tours to foreign visitors. What do you suppose that does for the dignity of a janitor? Because he or she now has an intelligent assistant enabling them to live and learn faster. Last example, intelligent algorithm. My example of that is the partnership between Khan Academy and the College Board, the people who administer the PSAT and SAT college entrance exams. We all know the story. In 11th grade, you have to take the PSAT as practice exam for the SAT to get into Harvard or Yale or wherever we want to go. We also know that over the years, many parents would hire a tutor to goose their kids' verbal or math scores. If you came from a family or neighborhood where people could afford to do that. A completely rigged game. A completely rigged game, because if you came from a family or neighborhood that couldn't afford it, you were at a total disadvantage. So 3 years ago, Sal Khan from Khan Academy partners with the College Board, and they create an intelligent algorithm for free PSAT and SAT prep. The way it works is I take my PSAT in 11th grade, I get the results back. They tell me, Tom, you're very good in language and reading. You could have a future in journalism, but you have a problem with math. In fact, specifically, you have a problem with fractions and right angles. It then takes me to a practice site just for fractions and right angles. Exactly my weakness. Waste no time on the strength. If I do well there, it takes me to another site that says you could be an AP Math. Me, in AP Math? No one in my family was in AP Math. No one in my neighborhood's in AP Math. I don't even know what AP Math is. I could be in AP Math. I do well there, it takes me to another site with 180 college scholarships. Last year, 3 million American kids got free PSAT and SAT prep on this intelligent algorithm. So, last example quickly is called Opportunity at Work. This is another intelligent algorithm, very important. We have 32 million people who started college in this country and never finished. Some went 1 year, 2 years, 2.5, 3.5 years, dropped out, went to apply for a job. The boss said, "Where's your BA?" "I got none. Sorry, no job." A total waste of human talent. So intelligent algorithms like Opportunity at Work have emerged. You can go to them now. They will measure what you learned in 1 year, 2, 3, 3.5 years. They will badge it, and they will partner with companies to slot you in. So I profiled a young African-American woman, Lashana Lewis, who went to Michigan Tech for 3.5 years. She studied computer science, had to drop out after 3.5 years for family reasons, ended up driving a bus to and from a computer school, couldn't make that up, and working on the help desk at a law firm, helping lawyers rediscover their lost passwords. She got connected to Opportunity at Work. There's actually another algorithm like it. They partnered with MasterCard, slotted her in as a systems engineer at MasterCard, and today she is a senior systems engineer at MasterCard. And as Lashana says in her interview in the last line, "And today, I still don't have my BA." That is an intelligent algorithm. Now I'm going to make you all a bet. I'm going to bet none of you have ever heard of any of this. And that's because you were following our last election, where Bernie Sanders' big idea to help people on the road from education to work was to tear down all the big banks. Donald Trump's big idea was to tear down Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton's big idea was to direct you to her website, www.hillaryclinton.com. The fact is, there is massive innovation going on in this country on the pipeline of education to work, so much so I almost thought of writing a book just about that. And no one is telling anybody. In fact, there's so much going on that nothing has to be invented. Whatever you can think of, I will show you somebody's already thought of it and is implementing it. But no one is telling people about it. It's much easier to tear down or to propose tearing down the big banks. So that's a good segue to how politics is being reshaped in the age of acceleration. Now, my argument is that we're not just in the middle of one climate change today. We're in the middle of 3 climate changes at once. We're in the middle of the change of the climate, okay? We're going from what I call later to now. So when I was growing up, later was when you could fix that river, clean that lake, repair that forest, save that animal. You can do it now or later. Well, later will now be officially too late. So whatever you're going to do to save, you better save it now, because later is officially over. That's a climate change. We're in the middle of a climate change in globalization. We're going from an interconnected world to an interdependent world. That's a difference of degree, that's a difference of kind. In an interdependent world, your friends can kill you faster than your enemies. If Greece or Italy go bankrupt tomorrow, this meeting is not happening. Greece and Italy, they're allies. They're in the EU, they're in NATO. Our friends can kill us faster than our enemies in an interdependent world, and our rivals falling is more dangerous than our rivals rising. If China takes another island in the South China Sea, personally, couldn't care less. If China goes from 6.5% growth to 0 growth, this meeting is also not happening next year. We are much more threatened now by our rivals collapsing in an interdependent world than rising. And lastly, we're going through a climate change in technology, because we now have machines that can analyze, optimize, prophesy, customize, digitize and automize at a speed, scope, scale, and specificity we've never seen before. We're going through 3 climate changes at once. And when you're going through something that fast, small errors in navigation can have huge consequences, which is why leadership and presidential leadership really matters now. So as I thought about that, I said to myself, what do you want when the climate changes? Well, you want 2 things. You want resilience. You want to be able to take a blow. Stuff happens when you have climate change. But you also want propulsion. You want to be able to leap ahead. You don't want to be curled up in your ball in your bed because the climate's changing. So then I said, who do I call about how you get resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? And then I realized I knew a woman. She's 3.8 billion years old. Her name's Mother Nature. And she dealt with more climate changes than anybody. So I called her up, made an appointment, went out to see her. I sat down, I said, Mother Nature, what are your strategies for producing resilience and propulsion when the climate changes. She said, Tom, well, first of all, I have to warn you, everything I do unconsciously. But these are my strategies. She said, first of all, I am incredibly adaptive. There's kind of a rule in my world, only the adaptive survive. And I do it in a very brutal way through a process I call natural selection. But I really reward not the strongest, not the smartest, but the most adaptive. Second, she said, I'm incredibly pluralistic. Oh my God, I'm the most pluralistic person you know. I like to try 20 different species, see who wins. I love diversity. My most diverse ecosystems are my most resilient ecosystems, and they're also my most propulsive ecosystems. Third, she said, I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Wherever I see an open space, I fill it with a plant or animal perfectly adapted to that niche. I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Fourth, she said, I'm incredibly sustainable. In a circular way, everything is food, nothing is wasted. Eat food, poop seed, eat food, poop seed, nothing wasted in my world. Fifth, she said, I'm incredibly hybrid and heterodox. Nothing dogmatic about me. I'll try any bees with any flowers, any trees with any soils. But lastly, though, she said, I do believe in the laws of bankruptcy. I kill all my failures. I return them to the great manufacturer in the sky, and I take their energy to nourish my successes. Well, what I argue is that the communities, companies, and countries that most closely mirror Mother Nature's killer apps for producing resilience and propulsion when the climate changes are the ones that are going to thrive in this age of acceleration. And since it was election year, I thought, what the hell? What if Mother Nature were running in the 2016 election in the United States? And so I invented Mother Nature's political party and what she would have run on given her philosophy. I won't go into the details, but suffice it to say on some issues, of course this is all just a proxy for my own politics, suffice it to say, on some issues, Mother Nature is to the left. She's very hybrid and heterodox. She's to the left of Bernie Sanders. Mother Nature would be totally for universal health care, okay, for every citizen. Because she would understand the world is going to get too damn fast for too many people. We need to strengthen our safety nets and trampolines. But to pay for it, Mother Nature would be to the right of the Wall Street Journal editorial page. She would want to abolish all corporate taxes and replace them with a carbon tax, a tax on sugar, a tax on bullets, and a small financial transaction tax. Unfortunately, in our politics, if you're for stronger safety nets, you're never for radical entrepreneurship. And if you're for radical entrepreneurship, you're never for stronger safety nets. What would Mother Nature call that? Stupid, that's what she'd call it. She would know you can never build resilience that way. Let me close by talking about two other realms very quickly that are being reshaped and very central to your lives. And I'm just going to take one very quick swig of this. The first is ethics, something the Institute has such an important role to play. Ethics. My chapter on that subject is called, Is God in Cyberspace? Is God in cyberspace? Comes from the best question I ever got on book tour. 1999, I'm in Portland, Oregon, at the Portland Theater. I'm selling a book called Lexus and the Olive Tree. And a young man stands up at question time in the balcony and says, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? I said, I have no idea. And I felt like a complete idiot. So I came home and I called my spiritual teacher. He's a rabbi I got to know at the when I was the New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem at the Hartman Institute. His name's Zvi Marks, a great Talmudist. Lives today in Amsterdam, married to a Dutch priest, very interesting character. I called him in Amsterdam. I said, Zvi, I got a question I never had before. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have said? And he said, well, Tom, in our faith tradition, we have two concepts of the Almighty. One is that he's almighty. The biblical concept, he's almighty. He smites evil and rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, cheating, slanderous talk, prevarication, and now we know fake news, okay? But he said, fortunately, we have a post-biblical view of God. And the post-biblical view of God is that God manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. Only we can bring God into cyberspace. Well, I like that answer. I put it into the paperback edition of Lexus and the Olive Tree, where none of you saw it, and it sat there for 20 years. I sat down to write this book, and suddenly I found myself retelling that story, spontaneously. And finally I sat myself down and said, why are you retelling that story? And it quickly became apparent for two reasons. One just happened last year. I think 2016 will be remembered as the year when, in the developed world at least, we started living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. We started living, that's where we bought a book, found a date, found a spouse, bought a car, got a mortgage, got our news, shared our news, connected. We're now living our lives, 51%, if not more, in cyberspace. And my definition of cyberspace is that it's a realm where we're all connected, but no one's in charge. There's no stoplights in cyberspace, no courts, no justice, no 1-800, please stop Putin from hacking my election. We're living our lives now in a realm that is fundamentally God-free. And at the same time, because of these amplified and accelerated powers, we're now standing at a moral intersection we have never stood at before as a human species. In 1945, we entered a world where one country, post-Hiroshima, could kill all of us. If it had to be one country, I'm glad it was mine. I think we're entering a world where one person will be able to kill all of us, and where at the same time, all of us could actually fix everything, just like those kids were demonstrating. We have never been in a world where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us, if we put our mind to it, those kids showed you, we could actually feed, house, clothe, and educate every person on the planet with these amplified powers. We have never been to this intersection before where one of us could kill all of us and all of us could fix everything. And what does that mean? It means we have never been more godlike as a species than we are today. Well, put those two together. We've never lived more of our lives in a realm that's God-free, and we have never been more godlike. And what does that mean? That means everybody needs to be in the embrace of sustainable values, and most importantly, the golden rule, the mother of them all. Do unto others as you wish them to do unto you. Every faith and culture has a version of it, because we now live in a world where more people can do unto you farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before, and you can do unto others farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. If you are not in the teaching and promoting and inspiring of the golden rule as an education or spiritual institution, you are not in business. Everyone needs to be in the grip of the golden rule. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. Is there anything more naive? I actually gave this talk as the commencement address at Olin College of Engineering last May, a year ago May. And I told the parents there, I know what you're thinking. You paid 50 grand so your kid could get an engineering degree. And they brought in a knucklehead commencement speaker who's preaching the golden rule. Is there anything more naive? And what I told them is what I would tell you and what I say in my book, naivete is the new realism. Because I'll tell you what's really naive. Thinking we're going to be okay in a world where we are this interdependent and individuals this super empowered if everyone is not in the embrace of the golden rule. Where does the golden rule come from? Two places primarily: strong families, good parenting, and healthy communities. I'm not an expert on strong families. Hope I built one, but would never preach to anyone on that subject. But I am an expert on healthy communities because I grew up in one, a little town, suburb outside of Minneapolis called St. Louis Park. And that's why my book ends where I started, with community. Very short story and very quickly so I can finish. In Minnesota, my grandparents came from Eastern Europe. The Jews all settled in one basic community in Minneapolis, in the north side of the city with African Americans. We were not integrated there. We were isolated there. Minneapolis was the capital of anti-Semitism in the 40s. My parents couldn't join AAA until Hubert Humphrey became mayor and cleaned it out of city government. After the war, the men come home, and between 1953 and 1956, the entire Jewish community, including my parents, I was born in 53, move out of the north side to one town, one suburb called St. Louis Park, the only one that didn't have redlining, restricted covenants, and had a housing stock that could handle them all. Overnight, a suburb that was 100% white, Protestant, Catholic, Scandinavian became 80% white, Protestant, Catholic, Scandinavian, and 20% Jewish. If Sweden and Israel had a baby, it would be St. Louis Park, okay? And thus began a fascinating experiment in inclusion. Let's see what happens when you take these neurotic Jews shot out of the ghetto and you put them with these pluralistic Swedes and see what happens. And what happened was a really interesting explosion of creativity. And there were broken hearts and broken dates and broken friendships, but in the end, we built a pretty interesting community because I went to the same high school, Hebrew school, and grew up in the same neighborhood with the Coen brothers, Al Franken, Norm Ornstein, Michael Sandel, Alan Weisman, who wrote Someone Like You, The World Without Us, Dan Wilson, who wrote Someone Like You with Adele, Peggy Ornstein. We all were on the same high school paper, grew up in the same neighborhood at roughly the same decade. It was a freaky place. This was not a neighborhood on the Upper West Side of New York. This was a little one high school town in Minnesota. The Coen brothers movie, A Serious Man, was about our little town. In fact, if you saw No Country for Old Men, you remember the scene where Churga blows up a car outside of a pharmacy in Mexico to go in and steal drugs. At the end of the scene, it pans to the pharmacy. It's called Mike Zoss Drugs, which was our local St. Louis Park drugstore. So there's all these homages in the Coen brothers movie about our little town. It was a freaky place, and it bred in all of us a real civic ethic, a real sense that politics can work. Sandel took it into political theory, Ornstein and Franken into politics, others into music and journalism and art. I took it into column writing. It was an interesting place, and I learned this thing, which if you're not from Minnesota, it's hard to explain, that shaped my politics and my moderation, called Minnesota Nice. Hard to explain what Minnesota Nice is. I give a couple of examples in the book. When I was writing the book, I was home for a wedding of one of my best friends. My best friends are still the people I grew up with, so I go home a lot. Jay Goldberg comes to the wedding and sits down at the table with me. He says, Tom, my wife Eileen was driving on the ring road around Minneapolis today, and a driver almost drove her off the road. She came home and said, Jay, I was so mad, I almost honked. Okay. That's Minnesota for road rage. My dad grew up, there was a Jewish mafia in Minnesota led by a gangster named Kid Can. And when I was growing up, I was 5 or 6 years old. My dad came home one day and told me one of his friends was sent to jail. And I thought, as a 5-year-old kid, your dad knows someone who was sent to jail. That is a freaky thing. Which is why I never forgot what my dad said when I asked him, what did he do? And he said, son, he was shopping in a store before it was open. Okay. That's Minnesota for breaking and entering. Anyways, I tell the story in my little community. That's the penultimate chapter. And the last chapter is I left Minnesota in 1971 to discover the world, and I came back 40 years later and found the world had discovered St. Louis Park. Now my high school is 50% white Protestant Catholic Scandinavian, 10% Jewish, 10% Latino, and 30% Somali. And some African American, mostly Somali. Same neighborhood that took the Jews, 50 years later took the Somalis. Now the inclusion challenge is so much deeper, racially and religiously, so much more difficult. And I tell the story of how they're doing. I'll leave the details for you, but they're doing pretty well, but it's a struggle, it's hard. But it's a reminder to me, and the reason I am an optimist is that although these are incredibly hard problems, it's amazing how many people out there want to get caught trying. If you want to be an optimist today, stand on your head. The country looks so much better from the bottom up than from the top down. And that's because our friend out here, Amory Lovins, likes to say, whenever you ask Amory, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Amory always says, I'm neither, because they're just two different forms of fatalism. Everything will be great. Everything will be awful. Amory says, I believe in applied hope. I believe in applied hope, and I believe in applied hope because I see across the country, from community to community, the number of people applying hope. Which is why my talk and my book ends with my theme song. The book had a theme song. I explored whether I could buy this, so when you opened the book, it would play this song like a Hallmark card plays Happy Birthday. The book is by one of my favorite singers. The song is by one of my favorite singers, Brandi Carlile. The song is called The I, E-Y-E. And the main refrain is, I wrapped your love around me like a chain, but I never was afraid that it would die. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. See my 3 accelerations? I think they're a hurricane. I think Donald Trump is trying to build a wall to the hurricane. I'm trying to build an eye that moves with the storm, draws energy from it, but creates a platform of dynamic stability, the healthy community, where people can feel connected, protected, and respected. I think the great struggle in our politics going forward is going to be between the wall people and the I people. And my book is a manifesto for the I people. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think we have time for 2 questions, and for those who want to stay and those who don't, I totally understand. So we've got a microphone over here, if anyone, and a microphone back there. So just give it 1 second. Just let the people want to clear out, need to go, and fire away.
So first of all, thank you for a most stimulating conversation.
Thank you.
My question is about AI, which I'm thinking you've looked at a lot. There was a movie several decades ago called Colossus the Forthcoming Project, which stuck with me a lot, about 2 supercomputers, one the US, one the Soviet Union, that then take over. And computers now having the ability to rationally figure. What do you think about that possibility?
So the question is, what do you think about the sort of scare theories about AI? I'm not an expert. And I know there's a whole school of people who are really worried about the singularity and computers are going to take over. My teachers are not in that school. So, they're the people who did IBM Watson would say they can really teach Watson how to be a cancer specialist, but Watson on his own can't decide to become a dentist. They're less worried about that, but they're much more informed people to talk to. My view, though, generally is that the computers only win if we let them. And I find there's incredible pessimism around this subject. There's all these studies out, by 2050, 48.7% of current jobs will be gone. 48.7, not 48.8, not 48.6, but 48.7. How about a little humility? How about who in the world knows what's going to happen in 2050? And how about betting a little bit, do you think we're the last humans, the last generation of humans that are going to figure out how to do creative things for and with other humans? I don't think so. So I find there's just incredible pessimism. My friend Duff Seid and I, we did a column last year called Hands to Heads to Hearts. So the argument was, first for generations, we work with our hands. Then we work with our heads. Going forward, we're going to work a lot more with our hearts. And that's why I created a term in the book I call STEMpathy jobs. They combine science, technology, engineering, math, and human empathy. I have an interview in the book. One of the most profound for me was with our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. Amazing guy, or I should say former Surgeon General, since Trump fired him without having a replacement, never talking to him. Vivek, I was interviewing him, I said, Vivek, what is the most prevalent disease in America today? Is it cancer, diabetes, or heart disease? He said, Tom, it's none of those. It's isolation. I thought, wow. We live in the most connected age in history. We just heard those kids. And yet the Surgeon General of the United States of America is telling me people feeling disconnected, isolated, and depressed is actually the biggest disease he's worried about. Tell me that is not going to produce a lot of jobs of the heart. Some of you may have seen I did a column last week about Airbnb. Because if you go to Airbnb sites, they now got 2 icons there. One says homes. So I want to get a home in Kathmandu. We all know how that works, great thing. But the new one is called experiences. If you want to have your mind blown, leave here, call up Airbnb, and click on experiences. So it started with, hey, you're renting my home. I'm a really good cook. Would you like me to cook dinner for you? In fact, I could do a dinner party. And then somebody else said, I'm actually an expert in the history of Bethesda. There's some cool places here. Would you like me to give you a tour while you're here? $35 a person. Well, that has exploded to, would you like me to teach you how to make a hat in London, a piñata in LA, a tour here, violin lessons. What you are seeing is people turning their passions into profits overnight. It's just igniting all of this because they created a platform for that. And so, I'm just not into that whole AI thing. My book is really a celebration of everything old and slow. those of you who follow me on Twitter and Facebook know, as I've said on this stage many times, I'm not on Twitter and Facebook. I'm not a big social networks fan. I know who my friends are, and they're not a thumb up or a thumb down. And I think all the really important things in life are all the things you cannot download. They're all the things you have to upload the old-fashioned way. Good parent to good child, good leader to good community citizen, good pastor to good flock. I think a lot of that stuff, if I could say one thing to those kids, it's all crap, okay? It's, not the inspiration, not the ideas, but falling in love with the technology and getting away from the face-to-face connection with other people. And I think there's going to be a huge industry in that. So I'm going to bet on hearts more than the singularity. Got time for one more? Yeah.
This really is our last question,
Yeah.
as Peter's got closing remarks.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Thank you very much. Okay.